Welcome back to our special discussion on the state of the Indian economy. I've been speaking with four stalwart economists, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, Dr. Shankaracharya, Mahesh Vyas and Soumyakanti Ghosh. We are looking for triggers to improve from this 5.6% GDP growth, which is the lowest in 13 quarters. Dr. Rakesh Mohan, will there be something in the global economy which can pull up the Indian growth, assuming for the moment that we are able to do something about the strong exchange rate?
Well, it is certainly the case that there seems to be a somewhat synchronized global recovery going on. United States, Europe, and Japan. But remember, we are talking about going from 2.4 to 3 or something of that order in the U.S. And similar small numbers in terms of recovery in Japan and Europe. So whereas it is correct that there certainly is a positive signal and a positive possibilities for India to take advantage of this. But you can't overestimate that.
Soumya, let me toss that same point to you. How much is import substitution eating away in terms of manufacturing in India? Is that a very big devil?
No, I think if you look into the latest import numbers, and I think the government is fully cognizant of that fact, recently it brought up that electronic imports. If you just look into the electronic imports part, even the electrical equipment sectors, these are some of the sectors which has been very hard hit by the cheap imports, possibly from China, mostly from China. And I think the exchange rate is itself playing a part, because right now, even though the dollar, there has been a sizable appreciation in most of the currencies against the dollar. But what is more important and we should look into is that the movement of the rupee against the other currencies, the basket of currencies. So I think there lies the problem, and given the fact that the Indian rupee has appreciated significantly against the Chinese currency, there has been a rise in the non-oil, non-gold imports significantly, and that is putting a lot of pressure on the manufacturing sector. And in fact, if you look into the IIP data, you will find all these sectors which has been plagued by cheap imports are actually doing very badly. And coupled with that is the implementation of the GST. So in my sense, there needs to be some clear-cut policy as far as this import substitution is concerned. Otherwise, it will take a little bit for the manufacturing sector to revive from take a revival from the current low status.
Okay. Well, let's look for some more solutions. Yes, probably on the exchange rate front, the Reserve Bank can do some firefighting. But Dr. Acharya, do you think that cutting rates and violating the fiscal deficit mantra, fiscal deficit boundaries, would be two other tools?
No, not at all, Latha. I mean, you have to see this from a holistic way. There are only three, in the short run, in terms of macro policy levers, there are only three ways of doing anything which will revive growth. One is fiscal policy, one is monetary policy, and exchange rate policy.
Yes.
And, you know, fiscal policy, I think we are already close to if you take center and states together.
Yes.
I don't have to go through the numbers, but, you know, we would probably end up close to 7% of GDP. Monetary policy, I personally believe that more could have been done and should have been done earlier. But, you know, the order of magnitude of change is unlikely to have, in the short run, even if there is further reductions in the repo rate, significant impact on investment and growth. So I'm left with exchange rate policy. To the point that you make of, look, if the RBI buys more dollars, it pumps in more rupees, which will add to a liquidity problem, which will reduce its profits, etc., etc. We've seen this movie several times before, and the lesson that should have been learnt is that, yes, that will happen, but we have instruments for sterilization, or what's called partial sterilization, by selling government bonds, either directly or through using the MSF in order to, in a sense, negate this expansion of liquidity. And that's worth doing in terms of the quasi-fiscal cost, because of the significant gains you get in real terms, in real investment, real growth, and real employment growth.
Okay. Yes, sir. Selling of bonds, the RBI has been doing a substantial amount of OMOs.
Let me also make one other point.
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, the net, we are not building reserves.
Okay.
Our exchange rate is appreciating relative to a bunch of currencies, whether you take 36 currency or whatever. I mean, the other thing I just want to slightly warn about, which we haven't touched on, is, we are somehow thinking, at least this discussion seems to be thinking, that, well, GST, there was a pre-GST quarter, which was a little unfortunate, destocking and so on and so forth. 2 months of GST have passed, and maybe it wasn't as disruptive as we thought. So now it's all kind of going to be roses all the way. I think that may be a little premature. I think you may well find that the transitional costs of moving to GST will continue for several months more, not just the pre-GST and 1 quarter of post-July 1. I think it will, and particularly as it affects the smaller businesses. And here, don't forget that a very significant part of our exports, whether you think of gems and jewelry or garments or leather or whatever, come from essentially small, medium enterprises. And these are the people who were hurt disproportionately by demonetization. These are the people who, in transition, I believe, will be hurt by GST. GST is certainly a good thing in the medium term, but there are transitional costs, and I fear that there'll be more to pay in terms of the time during this financial year.
Oh yes, job losses and therefore loss of demand, and therefore that impact on the manufacturing sector as well as the service sector. Mr. Vyas, what is the CMI therefore working with in terms of a growth number? Shaumyo thinks it will be 6.5% or thereabouts, even lower. Shankaracharya is working with 6%. What do you think we will make too, considering that you're not very confident on capex either?
Well, we believe the number is likely to be between 6 and 6.5%. So that's really very safe, I would say. But the growth rate is, I mean, I'm more inclined to believe that the number could come closer to 6 than be around 6.5%. So I also believe that the impact of the recent 2 shocks have long-term impacts, and that feeds through the investment cycle. In the sense that both demonetization, which has broken supply chains, which links to what Dr. Acharya said, that if the supply chain for garment manufacturers, handicraft manufacturers, gems and jewelry manufacturers is broken, we cannot take advantage of the recovery in the global markets. It's actually a difficult position.
Thank you very much for joining us, Rakesh Mohan, Dr. Shankaracharya, Mahesh Vyas and Soumyakanti Ghosh. It's a very sobering discussion that we have had with these stalwart economists, and the conclusion is that looks like we will barely make it to 6 or perhaps 6.5% growth this year. That's a very rude awakening for both the government and the corporate sector, and of course for us as citizens. Very sobering thoughts as far as the state of the Indian economy is concerned. Thanks for watching this very special edition of Indianomics.